Abigail, an unforgettable woman. There are individuals, and among them there are those who stand out. Some of these people have the power to transform the course of our existence for the better the moment we meet them. This is exactly what happened to David when he came across Abigail, a remarkable woman. This narrative unfolds after David lost his mentor, Samuel. According to 1 Samuel 25:1, Samuel died, and all Israel gathered to mourn his loss, burying him at his residence in Ramah. Then David left and took refuge in the desert region of Paran. 1 Samuel 25:2-3, Amplified Bible, tells us about a man from Maon whose possessions and businesses were located in Carmel. This man was extremely wealthy, owning 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and was in Carmel, shearing his sheep. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was not only beautiful, but also endowed with great insight, while he was rude and evil in dealings. He was a descendant of Caleb. There are 4 distinct categories of wealth. We can find wealth in what we own, what we do, what we know, and, most importantly, in who we are and the values we uphold. These are the riches of character. Nabal was immensely rich, but his opulence was limited only to his material possessions, this being the lowest type of wealth. It was harvest time for a sheep farmer like Nabal. Because it was a season of abundance, sheep shearing was a time of great hospitality towards others. Historically, this event was celebrated with a banquet where there was plenty for everyone. Nabal, whose name means fool, seemed to reflect his nature well, since in ancient Israelite names were often linked to the person's character. We don't know if Nabal received this name at birth or if he acquired it throughout his life, but it is clear that he personified it. Abigail, in contrast to her spouse Nabal, brought together stunning beauty and profound understanding. The praise that the Bible gives to Abigail is significant, as only women like Rachel and Esther received such praise with the same Hebrew expression. How did a man like Nabal manage to marry a woman like that? 1 Samuel 25:4-9 in the Amplified Bible reports that David, upon learning of Nabal's shearing in the desert, sent 10 young men with a message in his name. He instructed them to greet Nabal with words of blessing and peace, and to remind him that his shepherds had been under David's protection in Carmel without any harm coming to them. David asked Nabal to confirm the veracity of these facts with his own men, and expressed his desire that his envoys be well received, considering the festive period. David made this request gently and respectfully, as he had provided a valuable service to Nabal, the protection of his flocks in times of frequent Philistine attacks. Contrary to what we might assume today, David did not act as if he were demanding payment for protection, but rather expected a fair reward at the opportune moment when Nabal made profits from shearing his sheep. David chose to send messengers, a courteous gesture, so that Nabal would not feel threatened. The greeting, "Peace be with you," was filled with benevolence and generosity, intended to prevent Nabal from giving anything out of fear or coercion. We also read, "Your shepherds were with us, and they lacked nothing. Ask your young people, and they will confirm you." This shows that David acted appropriately, patiently, and even provided Nabal with a detailed account of the services provided. David made a point of respectfully reminding Nabal of the generous practices surrounding the harvest and sheep shearing season. Then we read, "Please, give whatever you can." David did not demand that Nabal make a specific contribution, nor did it establish a value. He just left it up to the discretion of Nabal's benevolence. David's messengers waited the answer expectantly. In 1 Samuel 25:10-12, in the Amplified Bible, we see which Nabal answered to David's servants. "Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? Nowadays, there are many servants who rebel against their masters. I must get my bread, my water, and the meat I prepared for my shearers, and give to men of whom I don't know the origin." The young men sent by David came back and reported every word of Nabal's insult. It was impossible that Nabal did not know David, given the notoriety of this throughout Israel. Nabal's intention was insult David directly, aware of your identity, but choosing not to acknowledge it. Nabal used language that would sound common today. Who does he think he is? And he continued to belittle David, suggesting that he was a disobedient servant. That was untrue for, although not perfect, David always defended himself with caution from Saul's attacks. Nabal revealed himself to be petty and indifferent. For him, everything was a matter of personal possession, not of gratitude and generosity, who recognizes everything as belonging to the Lord. In 1 Samuel 25:13, David commands to his men, "Each take your sword." And so they did. Even David armed himself with his own sword. About 400 men followed David, while 200 remained to protect supplies. David received Nabal's answer as he wished, as a deep insult. David, known for his strength and skill as a warrior, was not a man to be challenged with impunity. He was ready to respond with force. This was not one of David's best moments, because he didn't react the way that the Lord would like, with love and kindness, returning evil for good. Walking on high ground is to endure insults with patience and tenderness. David did not treat Nabal with the same consideration and patience that dealt with Saul. Although I was able to show kindness to Saul, it seemed harder to do it with someone he saw as its equal or inferior. David did not go to Nabal to make a statement, but to destroy it. 1 Samuel 25:14-17 shows us that one of Nabal's young servants informed Abigail, Nabal's wife, about the insult of his lord to David's messengers. Reviling someone implies use contemptuous words. To Nabal's servants, it became clear that the situation was serious and that David wouldn't let the insult without an energetic response. They asked Abigail to take some action, not just for them, but also throughout the house. Nabal was a man so vile and wicked that it was impossible to talk to him in a sensible way. This clarifies why they don't. They immediately turned to Nabal. The book of Proverbs still had not been written, but they knew the truth from Proverbs 17:12. Rather find a bear robbed of its cubs to face a fool in his madness. So they made this appeal, life or death, to Abigail. In 1 Samuel 25:18-20, in the Amplified Bible, we read that Abigail acted quickly, preparing 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready to roast, 5 measures of roasted grains, 100 bunches of raisins, and 200 fig cakes, and carried everything on donkeys. She said to her servants, "Go ahead, I will follow you." But she didn't tell her husband Nabal anything. As I went down the mountain on the hidden side, she came across David and his men that descended towards him. Abigail acted quickly, proving to be a woman wise and perceptive, realizing the urgency of the situation and the need for immediate action. She did what Nabal should have done, but he didn't. Abigail's ability to gather a large amount of food in such a short time shows the extent of Nabal's wealth. If there was already so much food available, Nabal's rude response, David, is even more disappointing. 1 Samuel 25:21-22 shows us that David was justified, but it wasn't right inside him. He had the facts right, but not the heart. "If I leave any man of everything that belongs to you until dawn." This made David's decision clear. He planned to execute Nabal and all the men of his house. It was a typical response for the time. Nabal's own servants expected such a reaction. 1 Samuel 25:23-31. When Abigail saw David, she hurried, dismounted the donkey, and prostrated himself with his face to the ground before David, showing respect. Kneeling at his feet, she said, "My lord, what the blame fall upon me? Allow your servant to speak and listen to her words. Don't pay attention to this man, insignificant Nabal, for as his name, so is he. Nabal, fool, is his name, and foolishness, stupidity accompanies it. But I, your servant, I didn't see my lord's young men that you sent. Now, my lord, I live the Lord and his soul, since the Lord prevented him to shed blood and to take revenge with your own hands. Allow your enemies and those who wish harm to my lord be like Nabal, destroying yourselves." May it be present brought by her servant be given to young people who follow and serve my Lord. Forgive the transgression of your servant, for the Lord surely will make my Lord a firm and lasting home, because my Lord fight the battles of the Lord, and no harm will be found on you all your days. If someone gets up to chase you and seek your life, that the life of my Lord be among the precious preserved by the Lord their God. But those of your enemies, these he will cast away like from the center of a sling. And when the Lord fulfills all the good he promised to my Lord, and establish him as leader over Israel, that this is not a source of regret or of remorse for my Lord, not for having shed blood unfairly, nor because avenged himself. When the Lord is generous with my Lord, remember favorably of your servant. Abigail managed to remain hidden from David until the moment they met face to face, due to the mountainous terrain that allowed you to go down the hill remaining hidden. It seems that Abigail was the first to see David, and when he first saw her, she bowed before him, taking with him a large train of gifts and provisions. David was anxious and irritated when, suddenly, out of nowhere, a large entourage of gifts approached David, and in front was a charming woman who bowed before him. This caused David and all his company stop immediately. David was certainly surprised by this vision. Abigail quickly dismounted the donkey. He prostrated himself with his face on the ground and addressed David in the most humble way possible. She did not present herself as superior, but rather in the position of a servant dedicated to him. In her supplication, Abigail acted in an exemplary manner which strengthened his request. As soon as he became aware of the emergency, she wasted no time and acted promptly. Abigail knew it was of a situation that required speed and therefore acted promptly. When addressing David for the first time, she took responsibility for sin, saying, "About me, my lord, may this sin recur." She showed respect to David, something Nabal did not do. Instead of taking the initiative of the conversation, Abigail asked permission to speak, which was a gesture of humility. In his supplication to David, Abigail skillfully conveyed the favorable conclusion that I hope to achieve. She phrased her words so subtly, leading David for the desired result. Abigail offered a gift to David, but he was insightful when he said which was aimed at young people who followed him, and not himself. If I said it was for David, it might seem like I was just interested in the goods, and that his honor could be restored with enough money, which would be insulting. Abigail asked for forgiveness, clear and direct. Forgive the transgression of your servant. Abigail praised David's character, even though he was agitated and angry. She addressed David's current state, that was sinful, as an exception to its nature and generally noble character. My Lord fights the battles of the Lord, and no evil is found on you all your days. Abigail remembered David of God's promises for your life. The Lord will surely make for my Lord a lasting home. She encouraged him to look beyond of disturbing circumstances, immediate insights into God's greater promise. Abigail warned David not to act in a way that you might regret later to fulfill the word of God, saying, "There would be no anguish for you for having shed blood without cause." She advised David to consider the consequences of your action. What a smart move on Abigail's part. The best thing Abigail said, maybe it was this plea so that David would leave the problem in the hands of the Lord, avoiding seeking revenge on your own. However, Abigail made mistakes in his approach to David. She acted without advice or approval from her husband Nabal and did not inform him of his actions. Abigail openly criticized and sternly her husband to David. This villain, Nabal is his name, and madness accompanies him. It is not appropriate for a wife talk that way about your husband, or for a husband to speak thus of his wife. She also made herself available for David's future considerations, what could be interpreted inappropriately. When the Lord I have done well toward my Lord, remember then your servant. Here is perhaps the most crucial point of Abigail's plea, and she wore a remarkable expression. She said, David, You are like a beam that the Lord holds near and safely yourself. Your enemies are like stones, which the Lord will cast away. This invited David to act as someone who is close to God. David needed 400 men to do something that God could do it quickly, of throwing a stone from a sling. It reminded him of a time in which he truly trusted in God for victory, when he threw a stone of his sling and killed Goliath. With your wise words, Abigail diverted David's attention of Nabal and brought her back to the Lord. Abigail's plea was glorious because instead of putting David down, she elevated him, emphasizing his sublime vocation. Abigail, with her bold, quick, and wise plea, prevented David from following a sinful path. She made him reflect on whether his actions were aligned with their destiny and integrity. In 1 Samuel 25:32-35, in the Amplified Bible, David says to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today, and blessed be your prudence. E bendita face you, that you stopped me from shedding blood today, and to take revenge with my own hands. And indeed, as the Lord lives, God of Israel, that stopped me from hurting you, if you hadn't come quickly to meet me, Nabal would not have stayed, not a single man at dawn." David accepted what Abigail brought him and said, "Return to your home in peace. See, I heard your request and I grant you what you seek." Through your appeal, David was diverted from a course that would lead him to sin. He recognized that God spoke to him through Abigail, saying, "Who sent you today?" And David learned a valuable lesson. Our hurt feelings, they never justify disobedience. When others sin against us, we can feel that we have explanation for sinning against them. But our feelings hurt, they never justify us. You stopped me today to shed blood and to take revenge with my own hands. David can also thank God because Abigail got it remind you of your destination. Reign over Israel with justice and integrity. If David had killed Nabal and his house, this would permanently stain his reputation among the Israelites. They would always question your trustworthiness. This could also seal his destiny in the eyes of Saul, because for the first time, David would have given Saul a legitimate reason to pursue you as a criminal. Blessed is your advice, and blessed are you. It is important to remember that Abigail, he did not go to David empty-handed. His appeal was practical, because she paid the debt that Nabal had with him. When David received Abigail's gift, he recognized that Nabal had paid off the debt and nothing more was pending. Here, David knew the blessing to be preserved from sin. Indeed, it is a blessing be forgiven for our sins, but it's an even greater blessing be prevented from sinning. 1 Samuel 25:36-38 shows us that when Abigail returned to Nabal, he was offering a banquet in your house for the shearers, a feast comparable to that of a king. Nabal was happy because he was very drunk, and Abigail said nothing to him until dawn. The next morning, when Nabal was sober and his wife told him about what happened, his heart died inside him, and he was paralyzed, immobile as a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Nabal lived up to his name. He was a fool. His life was in grave danger, and his wife and servants were aware of this, but he doesn't. He ate and drank like if everything was fine, no worries in the world. Nabal represents in this sense the sinner who rejects God. Despite God's impending judgment, David would have killed Nabal, and God will judge the sinner who persists in rejecting it. Nabal's life could have been saved if he had simply invited David for your magnificent banquet. Nabal's avarice and folly were his undoing. His heart died inside him, and he became like a stone. The Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Abigail's wise deeds saved both Nabal and David from themselves, but they couldn't save him of the wrath of God. Nabal was never out of God's reach, and when the time came, God took care of him. In 1 Samuel 25:39-44, when David heard of Nabal's death, said, "Blessed be the Lord, who defended my cause against the affront suffered because of Nabal, and prevented his servant responded with malice." For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. So David sent messengers to Abigail proposing marriage. When David's servants came to Abigail in Carmel, they said to him, "David sent us to take you as your wife." And she promptly stood up and bowed with your face to the ground, saying, "Behold, your servant is ready to be a servant, and wash the feet of servants of my Lord." Afterwards Abigail hurried over, rode on a donkey, and left with 5 of her maidservants who accompanied her. Abigail followed David's messengers and became his wife. David had also taken Ahinoam and Abigail of Jezreel, and both became his wives. However, Saul had given Michal, his youngest daughter and wife of David, to Palti, son of Laish, which was from Galim. David understood that Nabal's death, it was a judgment from God, what the Lord demonstrated when David decided to allow God himself avenge the offense, rather than doing it himself. David sent messengers and proposed marriage to Abigail. Abigail had asked David in 1 Samuel 25:31, "Remember therefore your servant." David certainly reminded her and took her as his wife. Was this inappropriate? David was not married with Michal, daughter of Saul, at that moment. The author of 1 Samuel explains that, at that time, David was no longer married to Michal, for Saul had taken it from him and given to another man, Palti, to harm David. David will recover Michal later in 2 Samuel 3:13-16. Therefore, Abigail is not David's second wife, but rather the second wife to be taken by him. Watch the subsequent lesson about relationships it offers us. Relationship lessons from Abigail. First, direct and sincere approach. Abigail immediately asked David to forgive Nabal. Second, mental agility. She made David see that he didn't want to have a murder in your conscience. Third, eternal perspective. Abigail saw David and their relationship from a divine perspective. Fourth, gentle affirmation. Abigail sought David's benefit and filled him with encouraging words. These lessons reflect the wisdom Abigail dealt with an extremely delicate situation. She didn't hesitate to act when he learned of the imminent danger, and did this with a mixture of boldness and humility. Abigail demonstrated an understanding deep spiritual questions and the role that David would play as a future king. In affirming David's integrity and by appealing to him, do not stoop to the level of Nabal, she helped him keep dignity and trust in God, who is the true protector and judge. Abigail, with her attitude, not only saved your home of imminent destruction, but also conquered a prominent place in David's life. Her marriage to David was the result of his intelligence and devotion, and not an affront to your previous marital status. Abigail's actions serve as an example for everyone who seeks resolve conflicts wisely and faith in God's promises.